Welcome to the Spider-Fan Podcast. I'm Vince Green, your host, and with me today is my guest, Noel John Toohey. Say hello, Noel.
Hi, folks.
Alright, so today we're going to go over the 2002 movie Spider-Man, directed by Sam Raimi, starring Tobey Maguire, William Dafoe, and James Franco and Kirsten Dunst. What we're going to do is we're going to break down the movie, try to take it apart, put it back together again, and see what we come out with. So, Noel, I want to ask you your initial reaction to Spider-Man upon release. Were you excited about this?
Oh, I was absolutely psyched for it because I was a teenager at the time. Superhero films kind of really just consisted of, you had Tim Burton's Batman, it didn't need a special effects kind of element to go. Great films, you had Val Kilmer and you had, Batman and Robin, which was awful, and then you had Superman, which was like the generation before, but this was like my generation's real stamping into the superhero. It was so ambitious to do Spider-Man versus something like Batman just because of the power set, the kind of dynamics, and I remember just being completely and totally psyched for it. I was counting down the days.
Were you a big Spider-Man fan as a kid?
I was a huge Spider-Man fan as a kid. I had my grandmother used to buy. Back in the pound shop back in the day, you used to be able to pick up comics. My gran would just go in and spend €5-10, pick up the most random things, and of course a lot of them would be Spider-Man comics, and I absolutely loved them. Then the '90s Spider-Man series came out, and I was absolutely all over it. I used to, imagine myself being Spider-Man, jump around, play Spider-Man, look for Spider-Man costumes, all of that.
So would you say your initial kind of like exposure to the franchise of Spider-Man and the properties and all this would have been through the comic books? Because mine initially was through the animated Spider-Man series that you just mentioned, because when I was a kid, comics weren't very available. So, like, literally, I wasn't kind of burdened by the whole Steve Ditko of it all, the whole John Romita Jr. of it all. I wasn't really beholden to the comic books. I was more beholden to the cartoons. So do you think the fact that you read both the source material originally from its original interpretation of the comic books, then onto the series of the cartoon, do you think that coloured your opinion in any way when it came to watching the 2002 movie?
I suppose I probably had a bit of an elitist feel because I kind of had the best of both worlds. I was coming of age at a time where the animated series dropped and the comics were suddenly kind of in what would have been a small town that we grew up in at the time. They were kind of becoming available. So I knew, like, before I ever saw Sandman, before I ever saw certainly Venom, I knew who he was, and he came up in the series, and I was like, I told you guys this was going to happen and stuff like that.
So because you had a knowledge of the source material in all its different varied forms, so were you think your expectations were heightened or lowered going into watching the movie?
Definitely heightened. I mean, I wanted the sun, moon, and stars. I wanted to see, because you have to understand that Spider-Man, there was some 70s kind of cheap knockoffs and stuff that you can't really count.
Where this wall was actually the ground and he was crawling.
And the real bad webbing where essentially they throw a roll down over a bunch of dudes. But I was just like, wow, like actually see him. Because special effects, like The Matrix was only a couple of years before, and that was the first time, that was like a whole new generation of special effects, and I was like, wow, they might actually be able to do this. And just the idea of Spider-Man in New York, flying around, webbing, taking on the Green Goblin, and it just blew my mind, and I was really, really hoping that they could do it justice.
So going in with that, like, you had these preconceived notions of the movie and of the source material. Were you happy when you seen Tobey Maguire as being cast as Peter Parker and Spider-Man?
Tobey Maguire, I think they actually had to delay filming because I think he broke his leg or something. He was filming. He made one film before that, which I had kind of seen, and I kind of reserved myself. You know what I mean? It was from the very little I'd seen of him, it was still a complete departure. So I kind of said, okay, he's a tiny bit older than what I would have liked from the source material, because this was literally a snot-nosed kid trying to make it as a photographer. And but I remember I waited with bated breath. I was excited about Sam Raimi because he had made The Evil Dead, and as far as I was concerned, the man was golden, still golden. And I knew that it was going to be a big budget film, and I knew it was going to be exciting. But I have to say, Tobey Maguire, I can't remember being excited, but I also didn't have anything against it.
Yeah, so you pretty much you had no opinion one way or the other.
Proof was in the pudding.
Oh, cool. So when you looked at it back then, so you said you no opinion going in. So now, almost 20 years later, what is your opinion of Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker?
I thought he was an excellent Peter Parker. I thought he was a great Peter Parker. I thought he was a sensitive kind of Peter Parker. He was like, that was the thing about the Spider-Man jokes. He wasn't a comedian. He was he used it as a coping mechanism. If you kind of delve enough into it, he had enough tragedy in his life, but he used it as a coping mechanism. There was something like that. Tobey Maguire got the sensitivity of him, as well as the sarcasm of him, and you could see that the whole great power and great responsibility thing. It was both. He had great power, but it's sometimes you could see it was burdened with it, and sometimes he would make jokes like we kind of do in our actual mundane normal lives.
So, do you think he was a good Peter Parker and a good Spider-Man, or just a good Peter Parker?
Oh wow, I think he was both, and I think he did a really good job of the Clark Kent Superman dynamic of.
Like Richard Donner's.
Exactly. Yeah. Richard Donner's Superman, of separating the two.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the dark, brooding guy who's the superhero at night, and it's pretty obvious. Peter Parker was a kid trying to make it. He was trying to save up to buy an engagement ring or whatever it was he was trying to do, or he was trying to sell some pictures that he got Spider-Man somehow. That
some of the best pictures of all.
Yeah, some of the best. Like him actually swinging between buildings, posing for the camera, like, tying up burger. I don't know how he did it. Like
that's something even I questioned as a kid watching the cartoons. I'm like, how is nobody questioning how he's getting such high quality photographs of Spider-Man? Even as a 12-year-old, I was like, this is a bit far fetched.
crap. Yeah. I'll give you $200 for the lot. Yeah. But he was a struggling kid, and I like the fact that it wasn't like Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark, fame and fortune. It wasn't. He was actually a guy trying to live in New York, and that just came with really mundane, but really relatable actual problems.
I think that was the thing with Spider-Man. The reason he was so popular is because he was so relatable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's a real world guy dealing with real world problems, but when he pulls on that mask and suit, he's dealing with the next level of the human experience. He's out there, everything's magnified. It's like the good and evil, everything is personified to its nth degree, you know what I mean? Like, so he went from a world of grinding, let's try pay my rent, get these photographs in, try to get some money, and then all of a sudden he puts the mask on, he's fighting Green Goblin, which kind of segues me nicely into how did you feel of William Dafoe when you initially heard of his casting as Harry or Norman Osborn and Green Goblin?
Perfect sense. Just perfect sense. William Dafoe is kind of like it was like he was going to be a real debonair, good-looking guy, and something went slightly wrong at the last second. You know? He just has this absolutely.
He's left in the oven too long.
Like one part Brad Pitt, one part Argyle.
Yeah.
And he just had. He's a great. Well, he's a great actor. Like he's
Real
died
range.
in the wool, and even in 2000, I suppose when there were 2001 during production, he was still extremely established. It was a Platoon.
Yeah.
And films like that.
So I think.
Yeah, and he was just such an intense character. And the whole thing with the Hobgoblin, was a Hobgoblin or
Green Goblin?
Green Goblin.
The Hobgoblin's
Was that
later.
exactly, yeah. But the whole thing with Green Goblin is an actual insanity that came with his enhancement.
He's Spider-Man's Joker.
He's Spider-Man's Joker. That's actually really well put. So I thought William Dafoe was that was cast iron from the get-go. That was cast iron.
Me too. Even as like a younger dude, like I saw William Dafoe in earlier movies, and he's real range. He's great at playing manic characters. And the way he settled into the Green Goblin was like hand in glove. You know what I mean? Like he played a perfect Norman Osborn, because when you look at it, he's, as you said, he's like this debonair guy, but like something went wrong along the way, where like he's got this real rough edge to him, but like he's refined at the same time. And it's kind of like his acting skills are the same way. He's kind of like, he can be a bit over the top, but he's got a real refinement to his talents. You know what I mean? Like, so like when I seen or heard, I should say, of William Dafoe being cast, I was absolutely delighted, because he has real range, and he can play many different kind of the character on many levels. Because if you look at his portrayal of Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin, it's like really layered. Like at times he's really, really human, like the way he deals with his son. Like even though he has these different expectations of who he should be or how he should be, that like he really does have a real love for his son, because you do see him supporting him, trying to look out for him in this strange kind of overbearing way. And as the film goes on, like their relationship, at first there's a lot of friction there and it suffers, but his son is cut from the same cloth as his father. And he can kind of see the way they converge into kind of more of the similar sort of person as it goes along. And speaking of his son, what did you make of James Franco, which I thought was a bit of out of left field when it came to casting him as Harry Osborn?
Well, for anyone that's a bit younger than me, if they exist, if that's even possible, that the thing was just James Franco was in Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah, great show.
And it was a great show, and I had seen that. And then it was just like he was going to play, and he's going to play the son. He's going to play the prince to the throne. And I was thinking, like, okay. I remember just thinking, okay, because some guys just break out from these comedy roles into more serious roles, and they're absolutely fantastic. Some guys fall flat. So but I liked him so much from Freaks and Geeks. I just wanted him to do well.
Do you not think he was a bit aloof for the part?
He was. But I like when I was watching it, I didn't think it was like watching an actor that's just not good at acting. I think it was probably stage direction, that he was supposed to play a guy that's not fully picking up on everything that's going on around him. Because you have to understand that he's the best friend of the protagonist and the son of the antagonist.
Yeah.
And he's not supposed to, and his character isn't supposed to really understand what's going on around him, but he's supposed to be affected dramatically by it. And don't forget, he's also the boyfriend of the love interest now, when I think of it. So he's right in the middle of it.
He's in that love triangle.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think he had to be a little bit oblivious. And if he played a really, really astute, kind of really grounded guy who analyses everything around him, it might not have worked. So I do think...
Because he would have figured things out.
Because he would have figured things out. So I do think he gets a pass on that for me, even though I did notice it. Because I don't see how he could have been any other way. He doesn't know who his dad is, and he doesn't know who Spider-Man is. Yeah. And that's his character.
You could nearly even say that's the thing that kind of ran through his father and his relationship, that he never really knew who his father was.
No, actually, not at all.
Yeah, and the Green Goblin is kind of like a personification of how little he knew about his father. You know what I mean? Like, he had this other life, which at first was his professional life. And he always seen that he was kind of like supplanted in his father's eyes by this kind of need for success, and this whole thing, the way he was like very career driven, and like literally you could say that like the way he disconnected when he had these two personalities of the Green Goblin and himself, that one hand he's the father, and the other hand the Green Goblin is kind of like the manifestation of his self-centeredness, his ego, his ambivalence to humanity in a lot of ways, and just relationships in general, and like
his vengeance.
Yeah, exactly. His vengeance. Like, and his father and his son. Like, his father, if you look at it, like, has a similar relationship with his company as his son has with his father. He always felt overlooked and kind of like underappreciated and stuff like that. Always seen as an underachiever or a mess up, and maybe that's what kind of coloured their relationship, because the father was taking what was happening to him and kind of being passive aggressively pushing it against his son over time, and that's kind of probably what made their relationship deteriorate, and that made his son kind of act out, which kind of the same thing his father did. The relationship with the company kind of deteriorated, and he acted out by experimenting on himself and giving himself the serum and stuff like this. And you mentioned that James Franco and Harry is in the middle of kind of the love triangle between Peter and Mary Jane, who's was played by Kirsten Dunst. Now, Kirsten Dunst, I always thought was a high quality actress, but what did you make of her portrayal as MJ? Because that is a very particular role, and the aesthetics of her from the comic book and the cartoon. She was very like well known as the way she looked, like the red hair, the kind of buxom, kind of beautiful.
She was over sexualized a little bit.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
What was it Face a Tiger? You just hit the jackpot was this kind of famous line by her. Yeah. She just shows up and she knows she looks great. And Kirsten Dunst played a little bit more demure kind of character. She was, if I'm being completely honest, and Kirsten Dunst, I had seen her in Interview with a Vampire, and as a child she won an all. She's an incredible actress. But she was kind of the love interest, as in she was searching for love, and she kind of ended up in a lot of Lois Lane scenarios. You know, not by
the damsel in distress.
The damsel in distress. I mean, it happens to her in the worst of terms. You know, held over a bridge and all of that kind of thing. So I think Kirsten Dunst did an excellent job of what she was given. But again, it probably wasn't the most empowering female role that you're ever going to see in a film. She was the lovesick damsel in distress tied to a train track, but heart of gold kind of girl, like, you know.
Yeah, it was probably a bit of the most generic of all the characters.
It was definitely the most generic, but that can't be on Kirsten Dunst's head.
Yeah,
you know, that was the script, and that's what was written. She was Peter Parker's inspiration or whatever.
So you mentioned Richard Donner's Superman. Do you think that the kind of Margot Kidder, I think, played
Margaret Cotter, Margot Kidder,
I think Kidder, something like that, and she played Lois Lane in the Donner ones, and her role was, she was this empowered female, but in the end of the day she was always the damsel in distress needing of saving. And do you think because of the obvious influences that Donner's Superman had on the way Raimi brought this Spider-Man to life, do you think that kind of like hindered, or do you think it was a bit outdated, that maybe she should have been a stronger female character, that literally these tropes have been played out, and like even though it was 2002, it's a very kind of like backward way of thinking of, instead of having this strong female character that was independent in her own right, she just amounted to not more than a damsel in distress constantly, or a burden to Peter Parker in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely think if you were to look back on it, it's even in 2002, it was definitely played out. She happens to get robbed by 6 guys at the exact same time. She ends up like just having a guy swoop out of the sky and literally snatch her away. She was in the entire thing. She never, like, Lois Lane had an edge to her. I didn't get that.
She added to the narrative.
Exactly. She didn't add to the narrative. She famously says when she falls from the top of the building and she's saved by Superman for the first time, instead of being the hapless female, he says, "I got you." And then she goes, "Who's got you?"
Yeah, exactly.
Because a man is flying, And Kirsten Dunst never got that. She was just screaming, and he told her to climb down the cable during that very famous first encounter with the Goblin. And she's like, "I can't do it," but Spider-Man convinces her that she can, and she falls 50 feet and grabs onto the side of the carriage and doesn't have her arms ripped off, which was just absolutely, that was her superpower apparently.
And the first real like major appearance in the movie from the Goblin himself was during the Macy Gray concert. And do you think, when you seen that suit in all its glory, I know we saw the suit earlier on, but to see it in broad daylight in all its glory, how did you feel sitting in the cinema some 20 odd years ago and saying, what did this feel like the Green Goblin to you? When you saw that suit, how did you think of the aesthetics and stuff?
Well, I kind of liked the cheap, like, the Green Goblin was, he was unabashed in the fact that he was a joke character. He had he had pumpkin bombs, and he had like a pantomime kind of mask, and
he was a very on the nose character.
Yeah, he was a very on the nose character, but he was so on the nose that it kind of did work. And when he showed up, he was a little bit more slick, let's just say, than I would like. It looked like a little bit more like a combat suit.
Yeah.
My partner, my fiance, commented that that's a Power Rangers bad guy.
Yeah,
and she wasn't wrong. Like, it was, he kind of showed up and went, impressive.
And like, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but how did the Green Goblin get his powers from Serum in the comic books?
Actually, I don't even really recall. I do know that it was Norman Osborn going insane and having access to the technology, kind of a la Bruce Wayne, through Oscorp. But I actually don't know. I suppose I have to admit to a lack of knowledge in that one.
Do you know, like, the one thing I had a major problem with the suit? I know I mentioned to you about the fake abs and pecs and stuff like that. Anatomical correctness and body armor makes no sense to me. But the mask. Like, how can you, how can you say that mask was supposed to be for a military suit? Like, was it to strike fear into the hearts of his enemy or something? Yeah. I thought, like, there was no real explanation for the mask to look like a goblin. You know what I mean?
We're going to make it bulletproof, except in the mouth.
Yeah.
We're going to make it so you can get shot really easily. Yeah, no, that's it. It had no, and it was at that point. And of course, like, you're talking about a superhero film, so there is such thing called, like, suspending your disbelief.
Yeah.
But absolutely, like, and like, anatomically correct. Like, I think he should have had a little bit of a bulge that kind of veered off to the left. If you're going to do it, just go hell for leather and do it. Like,
do you think William Dafoe's hung?
Oh, I think William Dafoe's hung. William Dafoe fucks. I know that.
That's good.
Like, if he has a 2-incher, it's a 2-inch Punisher.
So we jump back a little bit at the start. So when Peter Parker is still Peter Parker before he obtains his powers, he goes to a school trip, and they make it very, very aware to the audience that he's trying to catch the bus. He gets on the bus, everybody hates him, even the fat kid didn't like him, and he said, "Oh, I wish I could even be that guy." Growing up as a fat kid, nobody wishes they could be that guy. And so, literally, I'm saying they took great pains to show that he was a big super geek. He was ostracized by his high school friends, his peers, and except for this one rich kid. And then they kind of I think they took, maybe it was a bit on the nose to start, where it's a bit obvious that they trip him up and he's being bullied and all this. And it's kind of like, I think that trope was kind of done to death even in 2002. And I just like, when you go to the part then, like, I think the opening might be the weakest part of the entire movie, in my opinion, because it's so obvious and it's so cheesy. And then when he goes to the school trip and you have this woman and she's giving seminars and presentations, and she's pretty much listing out all of Spider-Man's abilities. And then you have the spider that's blue and red and he gets bitten. And Like, my problem is not like it's staying true to the source material, but what did you make of that opening? Do you think that was the right way to go about it, or was it a bit cheesy, a bit corny, or what?
It was definitely corny, but it was actually, there's two sides to it. One, it was extremely close to the source material. But two, it doesn't necessarily always transfer to film.
True, right?
So when he's he's just like Wigad. He's a loser, but he's intelligent. And he has one good friend. But girls don't see him, and he's So they painted it on thick, and then it kind of gave this whole, it could happen to anyone, or greatness can just come upon you. And it was over established. I think he could have just been a dorky kid.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
just a dorky kid.
Do you think then after he gets bit in the hand and he goes back, he starts going through all these changes, and the next section where they kind of highlight his relationship with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, do you think that they actually portrayed Peter Parker to be a very unlikable character in those scenes? Because he's being very obnoxious, he's not like doing his chores or whatever. He's kind of like, the part where I thought was really stupid was where he's like, Aunt May knocks on the door, he's after webbing up everything in his room, and he goes, Aunt May, I'm working out, I'm not dressed, leave me alone. Does that sound very masturbatorial to you?
Oh, yeah, well, of course. I wonder if that was the joke, because I definitely didn't pick up on it, half my lifetime ago. But I'm moving my room.
Yeah.
But, I think also, it's sometimes just hard to get the balance between a kid that's hurting and a kid that's treating the few people that give a shit about him like shit.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a very thin needle to thread. But yeah, there was like a snot noseness to him, but at the same time they established that he was hurting. It was his Uncle Ben and his Aunt May. It wasn't his parents. There was already a lot of tragedy in his life.
Do you think they should have touched on what happened to his parents a bit more?
I think they probably purposefully left that kind of mystery to it. Just a kid whose life had fallen apart. And sometimes I like that, because especially when you're going to do an origin story. Like, if sometimes, we won't get into other films, but there's one film where they didn't get into it for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're just thinking, look,
you need less exposition.
Yeah, let's just get there, because especially when this wasn't like the Marvel universe of today. We didn't have much reference for it. I wanted to see Spider-Man. I wanted to see him swing between buildings, right in between New York taxi cabs, jump 50 feet from a standing position, all of that. So I think it hurried it along, which I was grateful for. But at the same time, I feel like maybe it's a bit backhanded then to go back over it and say I wanted more exposition on these certain aspects. Yeah. I wanted them to get to it, and they didn't take too long to get to it.
Because the pacing is one of its strengths.
The pacing is definitely one of its strengths. By the time he faces down with Flash, the bully in school that he accidentally hits with a tray, the webbing, all of that kind of jazz, I thought, yes, that wasn't too bad. We're here. Yeah. He's enhanced, he's stronger, he's faster, he has greater sense of danger around him. And I thought, wow, finally, I'm about to see Spider-Man. And that's when Spider-Man announced himself. And I don't know how many minutes into the film, I wish I did actually, just for the sake of the point I'm making, but it felt like the pacing was perfect. There was enough film left to enjoy Spider-Man.
It was around the half-hour mark.
That would be my guess.
And that's Flash Thompson. He's talking about the kind of local bully played by Joe Manganiello, who's going to be playing Deathstroke in the upcoming Snyder cut, I think, of the Justice League movie.
A big jump from being like a bully, like bully number one in a Spider-Man film many years before.
That's because he's aged like a fine wine. That's a handsome man.
He's a fine-looking man.
If anyone's listening to this, Joe Manganiello, just Google him. He's a handsome man.
He's a good.
He's rugged in all the right areas, ladies. That's all I'm saying.
I want him inside me.
You want him to wear your Spider-Man suit?
Yeah.
Where you like his Spider-Man suit?
I want him to give me a Deathstroke.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. And so they're very quick to settle you into where's Peter Parker's place in this world that he calls home. He's a nerd. He's at the lowest rung of the social ladder. He gets his amazing abilities, and it's kind of obviously like a lot of these things, it's used as a metaphor for guys going through puberty or whatever, and he's going through these changes, as he says, and literally as the movie goes on, it is like he's becoming from an adolescent to a full-fledged teenager, and then he kind of becomes a man later on in the movie after Uncle Ben's death. But I think the most truest said to the source material, the truest said was Spider-Man's origin where Uncle Ben dies. And I'm going to let you talk through that. So I'm going to say to you, I'm going to paint a picture. Spider-Man, he sees an ad. He wants to buy a car to impress Mary Jane. He sees an ad in the newspaper, ad out of comic books, and he goes to a wrestling competition
Mm-hmm.
to fight Bonesaw, who's played by the late great Macho Man Randy
The late
Savage.
great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
The late great Macho Man Randy
Yeah,
Savage.
a legend, steroids in human form. And so what did you think of that scene? Do you think, to me, that was the one that felt most like the source material?
I think that was perfect. I have no criticism of everything from when he shows up and he says, you know what, I've enough of being the loser, the lowest guy on the social ladder, as you said.
Yeah.
And this is where I get to show off. Who made that? Did your husband give it to you?
Yeah.
And Macho Man, which is, I think, Blue Balls made human.
Yeah.
In the ring, and he beats him easily because obviously he's literally a superhero, and it doesn't matter if you're just a strong dude.
Yeah.
But then he gets introduced by Bruce Campbell, which I'd like to give a shout out.
Oh, 100%.
Sam
Raimi alum, in from The Evil Dead. He played Ash in The Evil Dead. He's an absolute legend of the B-movie circles. And
to this day,
and he's actually got a book, if anyone's read. I think it's called Life as a B-movie Actor or something like that. Yeah. It's amazing. I read some of it because I'm not a completionist. And so literally, I'm going to say so the reason I brought up that scene in particular is not just because it was so true to the source material, hit all the notes, it was beautiful. And the real life ramifications of inaction. So when you look at Spider-Man, he gets ripped off by this promoter, and he, instead of the $3,000 that was advertised, he gets $100, whatever. Immediately after he leaves, a guy comes in, robs the guy, and then as he's fleeing, Peter Parker has his first chance to be super heroic, but he doesn't take it, and he allows the guy to go out of some sort of pettiness, kind of like a bit of vengeance against the promoter, just screwed him over. But the ramifications of that are super real world, and that leads to Ben Parker being killed by the guy who Peter Parker allowed to flee and get away.
Which he discovers when he actually tracks him down.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think of that scene? Do you think that had the real emotional payoff? It was kind of trying to come true with, do you think that taught us a lesson as the audience as well as the character? And in what sense, do you think that was, obviously it was such a major, the whole thing before that, great power comes great responsibility, is the mantra that Spider-Man lives his life by. And do you think that scene had the emotional payoff as it intended to?
I think it was probably, if you were just to break it down as cinema, I think it was probably the best scene of the whole film. You know, your man rips him off, and it's something I could imagine myself, just kind of going, this guy rips you off, and then the guy comes in and robs him, and he instantly asks you to help him. And we all have that, fuck no, vibe to us. Why would I go on my way to help you after even if it was, we've had it in our lives where somebody's just being rude.
Yeah.
And then they want you to give up your seat for them or something like that. I'm just making it up on the fly. And you go, no. But when you can do, if your capabilities were so much more, and that's literally the great power, great responsibility part. We're so much more to actually easily stop these things from happening. Do you have an obligation to? And it goes into a question of ethics.
Yeah,
it's a really, really powerful moment. And not only is there cause and causality, it costs him everything.
Exactly, yeah. And it costs him his father figure and all this. It's it kind of harkens back to for all evil needs to do to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And literally, this is just the perfect kind of encapsulation of this. It's he had the chance. But he still, in that moment, he gave in to the individualistic nature of himself. As he grows older and after Ben dies, he understands that there's a bigger picture. His actions have bigger meaning and bigger ramifications than what he originally previously thought in his pre-Spider-Man life. So this kind of set him up for everything that was to follow. This really coloured how he dealt with life and dealt with the world around him. So after Ben dies, and I think there's a bit of a time jump, and Spider-Man Peter Parker grows older. I think he leaves school, which to me was disappointing because really the kind of the whole thing behind Peter Parker is he's a teenager going through high school, and this is why he was so relatable to teens and people that are kind of being nostalgic about their youth. But they kind of did a time jump, and he's not even, is he even in college, or is he just working?
I think that was quite big. I think he was just, him and MJ, they were just trying to get by. You know, they really hit home with the working class man who's trying to make it in a very cutthroat world.
But he was kind of sucking on the teeth of the Osborns, wasn't he? Because he was living with Harry, and he mentions that the father got in the apartment. So he probably wasn't even paying rent, which is another thing that's kind of the antithesis of the character, because he's supposed to be this grinder, this guy that's eking out a living, but still eking out a living at daytime, and at nighttime he's taking down like, you know, these super villains that are like, you know, the personification of evil in the world. And like, I think they kind of took away from it, because if you look at it, he's nearly too polished when they do the time jump. He's like, he's settled in, he's a photographer, he's working with the Daily Bugle and all this kind of thing. Like, freelancing, yeah, sorry. And, but like, do you think that they kind of, it would have been better to keep him in high school for the first movie?
I 100% think that. And I've always thought that. And especially, like, what's the rush? Especially when, you know, when ultimately making a trilogy.
It's such a franchise-ready property, isn't it?
Exactly. Like, you know, and there's nothing about the film that would have been so costly to keep him in school, or at least keep him in college or something like that. He could have been doing a bit of freelancing photography, because it was always a big part of the Spider-Man. The Peter Parker. But yeah, no, they were trying to rush it along, and again, while the pacing of the film was good, I just don't think it needed to go there. It would have been great to open the second film with the established Spider-Man in his universe as an adult, but they were trying. I guess they tried to treat the film like a whole, and as they should. But they definitely rushed him into adulthood.
Do you think they did the time jump to kind of alleviate some of the disbelief in seeing a 26-year-old guy playing a 16-year-old teenager?
Well, actually, but how used to that are we? I watch shows to this day, and I ask my partner Sheila, I ask her, why age that person? Why age is she? And they're usually 22, 23, or even 24 years old. Child labour laws and all that kind of stuff. It's, you know, it's hard to do. So I looked at him and went, wow, that is one. You know, that's a 15-year-old guy who's lived.
Yeah. So we got the time jump now, and Peter's freelancing for the Bugle. They're not really. Do they tell you what Harry's doing? Is he working with his father? They're not really specific about what he's up to.
I think he's just trying to prove himself in his father's eyes, and I don't think they really bog themselves down with the specifics.
And Mary Jane's a failing actress, which we find out because she's waiting, and then she runs into Peter, which seems to be like quite some time since the last seen each other. And that scene, do you think like that's got the real emotional kind of payoff that like it should have, like, because you see Peter, he's actually he's kind of upwardly mobile in the world now, and she's kind of taking the downturn. She was like, just say, the prom queen, most popular girl in school, and now she's kind of peaked in high school. Now she's a waitress, and he's just like successful photographer. Do you think the way they contrasted their relationship previously to that moment, do you think that was kind of done well? Like,
yeah, I think that it was the most relatable part, because everyone aims for greatness, and it's just not on the cards for most people. He kind of meets up with her, and you kind of realize, again, he's upwardly mobile, but he's not top of the world. And she had like big ideas, and like you said, peaked in high school. That's the most generic thing, but I think they actually handled it really well. But I always think that Tobey Maguire just played the doughy-eyed guy for Mary Jane really well. Yeah. You could tell like he still looked at her the same way, and he did that really well. He just looked at her like she's the only thing in the world, and there she was, like, just with a name tag and a waitress uniform on, and he's telling her there's no shame in it.
And do you think that humanized her as a character?
Absolutely, it did. Because again, she was so hapless at times, but just being a normal human being in the world trying to get by is the most relatable thing that you can put into a film. You know, you can't just literally have her tied to a train track for the 90 minutes.
Yeah, so like instead of her just being human bait, she is actually a real life breathing character in the background.
Yeah, and it makes you care about her, because otherwise, like you said, sometimes you're human bait and you're like, maybe it would be great if she did get thrown off the bridge.
And immediately then, when you find out, I think it's around the graduation scene where Harry, you hear that Mary Jane, and I remember jumping back a little bit, but when Mary Jane, you find out she's broken up a Flash, and Harry suddenly just pounces on her. Do you think that's a bit out of left field for a guy that seems to care enough for Peter? I know it's a bit revenge, because Peter and his father have a much closer relationship because of the scientific aspects of their personalities. But do you think that was a bit out of left field in this instance? I know, like, in the comic book, I think it has happened a few times.
I think, like, what they really wanted to stress in the film is that Spider-Man can't catch a break. It's like, yes, wouldn't it be amazing if you had all of these powers, but he cannot catch a break. He cannot have steady work. He cannot have the girl of his dreams. And even though he's a full-fledged superhero, he's a menace. You know, all of the newspaper headlines. So I do think whatever they could do they really didn't want him to be an Iron Man or a Batman. They didn't want him to be like this like suave bachelor or, you know. socialite kind of character, and I think they kind of hammer that home perhaps a bit too much.
Yeah,
and they bring stuff in from left field just to let us know
something
that
more akin to Christopher Reeves in the Richard Donner Superman, where he's just like hapless nerd, you know, that kind of way, like
can't even walk through a revolving door without getting caught in it and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but that was it. They really tried to say like they kind of hammer home for the kids watching that, you know, they wouldn't fix your life.
So, like, he touched on it. In the papers, he was a menace. And the reason he was being portrayed as a menace to the general public was because of the main editor that ran the Daily Bugle, which was played by the incredible J.K. Simmons, and that is J. Jonah Jameson. And is there a part that's ever been better cast than J.K. Simmons in the role?
Impossible.
That is probably the most spot on casting in the entire film, if you ask me.
No, it's just impossible.
Like, he should have been in it more, probably, because he was so strong. I think the reason, like, maybe if they'd have focused a bit on that relationship more, because he was kind of thrown in nearly, not as an afterthought, I wouldn't go that far, but, like, do you not think that his relationships with certain people weren't paid the homage they deserved? Like, his relationship with J. Jonah Jameson is very transactional. It's very, you know, it happens before, it kind of happens before it's ever really begun, you know, that kind of way. Like, so when you look at the scene of, like, it's kind of, sometimes it comes across a bit corny, but they did give J. Jonah Jameson some props. He didn't give up his SARS, which I'll always mention, that when the Green Goblin attacks and blows up, what you make of that scene where you really see the first time where he thinks Spider-Man's working with the Green Goblin. What do you think of that scene?
Well, that's the thing. The one thing about him is he does fancy himself a journalist. So it's okay to be wrong, but he's not a liar.
Yeah.
It's actually how he perceives him. And even though they didn't use the character maybe as much as we would have liked, he got the maximum amount of every second he was on screen. He was never the second two character in any scene he was in. It was about him. Peter Parker was just getting chewed out by him, or he was just screaming at the staff about getting a headline out. He was perfection personified. But they kind of say that, he's rough around the edges, but he's not the bad guy.
Yeah.
He's, God, I think there is a word for it. Or like something that sits in between a pro and an antagonist. He was just this character. And he was the comic relief in ways, despite being a really, really intense character. But he was just played so well. And this is something that gets transferred from the comic book that does work.
Yeah.
Like, they brought the comic book character to life.
Yeah, because everybody's had an asshole boss.
Exactly. And in even a campish way. Like, he was so eccentrically, like, you know, I want everything done 5 minutes ago. And he kind of stays in that fifth gear, even when he's just looking at some pictures, even when he's just talking to his main editor. And it was one of the best performances.
Do you think that he was blinded by his own opinions of Spider-Man? Because he could clearly see that Spider-Man and the Green Goblin aren't working together, but yet they continue on that kind of route. So, like, what I was trying to touch on, I think that scene might have been a little bit needless, because the reason Green Goblin attacking him at the Daily Bugle was obviously because someone's taking Spider-Man's pictures. But do you not think that scene could have been used to actually change J. Jonah Jameson's opinion of Spider-Man himself, like, you know?
I think it was long picture. I think they wanted in that way. The film was very self-contained, but I think Sam Raimi probably had his eye on the prize, and he definitely didn't want J. Jonah Jameson going into perhaps a second film, which might have only been a dream in the back of Sam Raimi's mind. He didn't know if it was going to gross enough and all that kind of stuff, but he didn't want to lose that, because it's quite funny. The downtrodden Spider-Man is such a thing that he didn't want to give up 60 minutes into a film and just make J. Jonah Jameson, who's famously always had an antagonistic approach to Spider-Man, and he didn't want to make like a second film or a trilogy and just have him give up the ghost straight away. So I do like it. He's a good man in his heart, but he's too much pride to admit when he's wrong. But unfortunately, when you have something like a media outlet in your control, that it's not just a character flaw, it actually has real world implications.
Yeah, he's kind of bound by his preconceived notions of people and situations.
Exactly, and he absolutely refuses just admit that you're wrong.
So after that scene, right, it goes into the first real up-close interaction between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, where Green Goblin is kind of like trying to sell Spider-Man onto becoming his ally, and like to say that the world is against you. He's trying to paint this picture that Spider-Man has been turned on and discarded by this world that he worked so hard to save. And what do you think of that scene? Like, I think that scene to me reminded me a lot of the cartoons growing up. The way it was like the mist and the smoke, and it was on a rooftop and stuff like that. Like, and I think it was plucked straight from the comic books and stuff.
It's a devil on your shoulder moment.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, no matter how downtrodden he is, he hasn't given up on people. or he hasn't lost his moral compass, or even though he's lost Uncle Ben, he hasn't forgotten the type of man that Uncle Ben tried to make him. So it's a very character, like when I say character, I'm not talking about character of the film, I'm talking about the character of a character.
Yeah.
It really builds up and goes, yeah, it doesn't matter that he doesn't get the thanks he deserves, and it doesn't matter that, life is hard for him. There's a line that he absolutely will not cross. Even they were very careful with the guy who killed Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
They were very careful that he accidentally kills himself.
Yeah, exactly.
He trips over a pipe and falls out the window. Spider-Man doesn't catch him. Don't know if he really tries to catch him, to be fair, but Spider-Man did not kill him.
Yeah, it's kind of like in Batman Begins, I don't have to, I can't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
Yeah, exactly. So they establish him as like, yeah, look, he's going to have angry moments. He's not always going to be the best guy in the world, but there is a line he simply refuses to cross.
He's a human.
He's a human, exactly. So he's a superhero in the sense that he might be tempted, but he'll never give in.
Yeah, so do you think that's because of his relationship with Ben?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And I think there's a famous line from a Batman comic where he was just like, one of the Robins, probably Jason Todd, because he was the hired one, says like, you just don't have the guts to do what's needed, and that's like kill the Joker or whoever you have. And he goes, do you think that would be difficult? He goes, that would be the easy thing.
Yeah.
Because that would be so easy.
Yeah.
So I always thought it was kind of like that,
Every man has to have a code.
Exactly. And he goes, do you think that's difficult? What I'm doing is the hard thing.
Yeah.
And never, ever, ever kind of drop into that level. And I think they did a really good job in that, because the Goblin was so unapologetically on one side, the side of evil, the side of self-interest, the side of revenge, the side of maybe the worst sides of humanity. And Peter Parker, while not perfect, because no one is, he was definitely on the other side. He was on the side of virtue. He was trying his best to be a hero in a kind of a thankless world. You compare him to somebody like Superman, who was the golden boy.
Yeah, exactly. He's the Boy Scout.
Boy Scout, even godly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You used to have scenes in the film stuff where he'd almost come down from the sun.
Yeah.
Kind of come into view, and he was handsome, and he was, blue-eyed, all-American boy. So I like the Spider-Man in that.
Just that you mentioned Superman, do you remember the scene where Peter Parker is running and he tears open his shirt to reveal the Spider-Man suit? That was very Superman-esque.
That was very Superman. But I think that's tasteful.
Yeah.
In the sense, I think that's like a nod.
Yeah.
And not trying to take away from.
It's emulation, not imitation.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what it was. And to say that that's what it is, imitation is the highest form of flattery.
Yeah.
So Sam Raimi wanted to say like, I'm making like a superhero movie for the modern era. But that doesn't mean I haven't.
He's a true blue hero with shades of grey too.
Oh, absolutely. And any good hero is. Why do you think Wolverine is probably like one of the most loved? Batman is probably the most loved character.
Exactly.
Superman is.
We want flawed heroes.
We want flawed. Because you are. Because even though you sometimes you imagine yourself as a kid, I used to like play in the back garden, pretend to be this, that, and the other. But I never pretended to be this really perfect character that has no anger issue or no temptations.
That's the advantage of growing up with DC and Marvel in your life, because they paint real human people in these crazy over-the-top scenarios, but they're making human decisions based on human emotions at all times.
Exactly, yeah. So I never wanted to be, for me, like I can go back as a kid, I never wanted to be Cyclops.
Yeah.
I actually loved Superman. I wanted to be Superman, but Superman was like such a god tier character.
You just want him because of the abilities,
not
because
Batman
of the
Batman is essentially like he's Zorro / ninja.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like he's got all the gadgets and stuff. So there was the coolest was Wolverine, because he's the manly man, because he can take a beating. That was his power set. But like Spider-Man kind of fell into that. He was kind of like an approachable, not at all an anti-hero, a hero, but not polished. He used to leave like a change of clothes on the tops of certain buildings.
Yeah, exactly. I like that,
yeah. Sometimes he used to be in a bind. And that's the way he was actually trying to balance a normal life with a life less ordinary.
Yeah.
And that Spider-Man did better than absolutely anybody else.
So you think Tobey Maguire, or you mean the character Spider-Man?
I thought the character of Spider-Man, but I thought Tobey Maguire did it well. Like he came across as, of the Spider-Mans, he came across as the most sensitive. Like he was just a kid who was just trying to figure it all out, and it's coming at him very fast. And he was forced to grow up very fast, which they really pushed. We're not seeing that as much in films these days. They're kind of taking their time with it. Like the films these days have like era 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
Absolutely 12-year plans.
It's built for expansion.
Absolutely built for expansion. But like when Spider-Man came out, they didn't know if they were going to be able to create a Marvel universe. It wasn't a Marvel universe, it was a Sony universe.
So standalone.
It was a standalone. So it was ambitious. And look, with the exception of, we were watching it just earlier today, and with the exception of the scenes that are pure CGI,
yeah,
where like Goblin is... There's even one scene where he's flying, and I think his proportions are off.
Yeah.
Like, he looks like he's probably shorter than he actually is. With the exception of that, I think it's aged really, really well. And it's very easy to look back on something 18 years old and kind of shit on it. But, like, which, again, somebody having this conversation 18 years from now talking about Avengers Endgame could say the same things, like, you know, but at the time, I thought it was a really...
So you think everything apart from the special effects is aged well with the story?
Yeah, I think some of the special effects I look at and it's got a bit of a Jason and the Argonauts feel, like, you know, it was cutting edge for its time.
Yeah.
You're seeing it through the eyes of somebody.
But it was still the early days of a new technology.
You know. Matrix had changed the game a few years before, and they definitely had access to better technology, but it wasn't perfect. It's still not perfected.
Yeah. So do you think, like, when you look back at it, that every aspect of the movie, casting, special effects, aesthetics, like, I know we didn't really touch on the Spider-Man suit, that was incredible.
Spider-Man suit was incredible. 10 out of 10. That's all there is to say about it.
Yeah, and that ass on the bridge scene is incredible.
Tight ass, yeah.
It's one of the best web-slinging asses I've ever seen in my entire life. Not to say that I've seen many web-slinging asses, but that's definitely up there, the top tier of web-slinging asses. But
that's not like a slight at Andrew Garfield or Tom Holland's ass.
Yeah, I just don't think there was enough attention paid to his ass. I just don't think there was enough attention. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think, like, when you're talking of, like, when you want to rank the Spider-Man asses, that it has to be Tobey Maguire up top, or maybe an unknown super stuntman that filled the suit in that moment.
Actually,
I don't know.
Fair.
You know what I mean? I'm not sure.
Don't always get props.
Yeah, because Tobey Maguire might be doing squats, but I don't know to verify that. Like, but like, so we've covered the aesthetics, the special effects, and so two of the main people in Spider-Man's lives are Uncle Ben and Aunt May, who I thought were really underutilized. I don't even know. I could check, but I don't really know who the actors were they're playing. But I thought Aunt May was a bit played over the top. Especially that scene where Green Goblin attacks her and she's saying...
Makes her finish the prayer.
Yeah, it makes her finish the prayer. I thought that was a bit on the nose, a bit corny. Like, but so do you think the relationships he had with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, apart from when he was originally getting his powers and he was kind of a bit of a douchebag to them, do you think that was portrayed correctly, or do you think that was given the gravitas it deserved? Because remember, Aunt May and Uncle Ben are the reason Peter Parker's actually a good guy. You know what I mean? When he becomes Spider-Man, the reason he's a good guy and not a villain is because of his relationship with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. So do you think that was given the same gravitas it deserved, or...?
I think they probably had to be underappreciated characters, because Spider-Man himself is an underappreciated character, kind of on a macro, and they were underappreciated on the micro. He wasn't always as thankful as he should be. They were kind of like the old couple just trying to get by, but they loved him and they'd do anything for him. I thought they were played really well. I thought Uncle Ben kind of had a gravitas to him.
Yeah.
I thought his death definitely had gravitas.
Yeah, it was a
very good scene. I think like it was almost telling. The way he treated them was almost like the way he was going to be treated, and that's the great thing in cinema, whenever anything comes full circle, even if it comes in very, very different formats. So I never had anything bad to say about them again, except they were like almost pristine, like the Waltons or Little House on the Prairie levels of good, hard-working, decent people.
I think my only problem with Aunt May in particular was she's a very ancillary character. Like, you could have had that movie without her, but you can't have Spider-Man without her. I don't think she was paid the same respect. People have to remember that, like, the way Alfred is to Batman, she literally is the same way to him. She colours his perspective of the world. She literally builds him up. He's broken down after his uncle dies, and she's the one that builds him back up.
She's grounded as well. She never, she never gets caught up in the glitz and glamour no more than Alfred did of superhero life. Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right that you couldn't. In one way, you couldn't have it without her. But if you were to look at the screenplay and go, right, if I took her out of this scene, the film doesn't like suddenly not work.
Exactly. She's just background.
She's background. Yeah.
Which I thought was a little bit disappointing. I thought, like, there could have been a few, maybe there is a cut out there, but I think there could have been a few more moments of heart-to-heart with Aunt May. Maybe she's teaching him something that could have coloured his opinion or his actions later on in the movie. Like, the way they gave the great Parker's great responsibility scene with Uncle Ben, that's really well done. It's very true to the source material. But I think that Aunt May should have been used more, and because I think they should have maybe cast a better actor in the role, she might be being used more, or maybe they cast kind of a weak actress, in my opinion, in the roles because they knew they weren't going to use her more. You know, that kind of way. Like,
yeah, the thing is in comics, and this has been true since 1939, since Bob Kane was it, Reese Batman. Nothing builds character like dying.
Yeah,
Batman's parents,
Yeah.
and it's Uncle Ben.
You need that personal tragedy.
Yeah, you need that personal tragedy. So you don't have to get yourself bogged down in like real deep life lessons with somebody you love talking. No, just die.
Yeah.
Have the person die. They had Uncle Ben die, and they had it to some small degree be Peter Parker's fault.
Yeah, exactly.
Batman, they had the parents die, and they had him be in a position where he wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, and it was kind of his fault because he asked them to leave because he got afraid.
That was right. He got afraid. They were watching Zorro as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got afraid and he asked them to leave. So, yeah, so he carries guilt, but also he wasn't able to do anything. So he made sure that would never be the case again. And there's just no amount of disposition and there's no amount of monologue that can give the gravitas that something as simple as dying. She was just like, what she played after Uncle Ben died was a reminder that Uncle Ben lived.
Yeah.
As in, she was the widow, the woman left behind.
Yeah, exactly.
The woman who was lucky enough to have a man so good in her life. And it's not that she was a better character than Uncle Ben or Uncle Ben was a better character. Uncle Ben died.
Yeah.
And that's just the heaviest thing.
The living memorial of how he lived his life.
Exactly. And quite in some ways a reminder.
Yeah.
Just a walking, talking reminder of Uncle Ben, the thing that keeps Spider-Man as Spider-Man, now. The Spider-Man who will save Jonah Jameson without a thought, even when Jonah Jameson hates him and is accusing him of a crime during the rescue.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Uncle Ben gave him that.
Yeah.
The power and responsibility, the Spider-Man tagline, the one everybody knows. So I think they could have done more with her character, but when you do the death scene right, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just like there's no better origins for a character than personal tragedy. Or literally, as you said, you can cut out so much chat from the week by literally saying this is the reason for being. He felt to blame for his uncle dying, and this is and the reason, the way his uncle tried to get him to live his life is the way he's going to forever live his life because he felt responsible for his death. Do you know what I mean? So we've touched on a lot of stuff here. We've touched on, as I said, the aesthetics and the casting and stuff like this. So as the story progresses, Aunt May is being attacked, and Peter, I think it comes after the scene where the Green Goblin fakes, he fakes a fire, or not fakes a fire, but he sets a building on fire. He draws Peter Parker out, and he literally, this is the moment now where just moments before that, I think it's a Thanksgiving dinner, where he finds out Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And the reaction to that, I thought, was a bit silly. He just gets up and storms out. You know what I mean? I think he gives away a bit too much. And, do you think their relationship, the way they portrayed the relationship between Harry Osborn and the Green Goblin with Peter Parker and Spider-Man, do you think that was portrayed correctly throughout the movie?
No. I think it was more complex than it was given. They set it up to be quite a complex relationship. You set up with two people who care about each other, and then with ulterior identities of two people who are by default mortal enemies.
Yeah.
And then you have how one dynamic might shift into the other dynamic.
Yeah.
And they waited till the end of the film to just have Norman Osborn take off the mask and he reveals that it's him. So no, they didn't. They never got into the to the tickets with that at all. And I think they could have, or they should have. And again, maybe it's a pacing issue because there's so many. There's at least at this stage you've got 5 main characters with Aunt May, Kirsten Dunst, Mary Jane. You have James Franco. You have William Dafoe, and you have Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, and they're all spinning around each other. They introduced it about 2/3 of the way through the film, and then so if it was me and I'm sitting there and I'm the director in this scenario, I'm like, wow, how much time am I willing to devote to this?
Yeah.
I think it deserved more attention than it got, but I'm not going to pretend I'm a better cinematographer and I could have squeezed in the care and nourishment that it needed. If anything, maybe if you found out earlier, but then again, giving away a superhero's identity in the first act is usually just not a done thing either.
Because you're playing a game of cat and mouse.
You're playing a game of cat and mouse. Superman to this day has 4, his parents, Lois Lane and the Justice League or whatever, and pretty much end of story.
Yeah.
People who know who he is, your secret identity, it's something they don't give away quickly. And if you notice, Norman Osborn dies.
Yeah.
The best way a good way to get killed in a superhero film is to be a person who can't be trusted, finding out the secret identity of the main character, of Superman and Batman, of absolutely anybody.
And since you touched on the death scene, what did you make of the climax? I'm going to set the table. So we have Norman Osborn finds out Peter Parker is Spider-Man, so he starts targeting the ones he loves. He attacks Aunt May, and then he finds out that Mary Jane, I think, breaks up with Harry, and like a good father, I always said he's got a strange good father nature to him, so he decides to target Mary Jane because it's a twofer. You're kind of like getting revenge for Harry getting his heart broken, and you also get to bring Peter Parker out of his place of hiding. You draw him out into the open to be attacked and to be maybe killed. So when we set the table, so we're going to go to the bridge now, which is near the movie's climax, and you got Peter Parker coming in to rescue the perpetual damsel in distress.
For the second time. And the second time in maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit much. Like, I really think like they could have, like, she's so weak. She's such a weak character.
Yeah.
Like played by a strong actress, which, you know, it's silly, like. And so when we get to this scene, and Peter or Spider-Man, I should say, has to rescue Mary Jane, and so literally you got the scene on the bridge where Green Goblin's holding her aloft over, and he gives him a choice. This is the age-old choice of save one or save the many.
The tram that has many on one and the side.
And what do you think of that scene? Is it a bit silly?
Yeah, of course. Well, that was the over-the-top superhero scene. It was like, you have to pick one or pick many. And he was like, I pick both.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, he dives, he saves Mary Jane. What do you call those things? What the kids and everything were in. It was a cable card, is it?
What's it called?
A cable card?
Oh, cable card. You said a Kango card.
Kango card. No, that's different. Definitely different. But like, we suddenly discovered that he's able to hold aloft like about 9 to 10 metric tons.
Well, Spider-Man has been always ridiculously strong in the comic books. One of the strongest superheroes in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, but not compared to maybe Thor or Hulk, but he's always
Thor's a god.
Yeah, fair counterpoint.
Yeah,
and then he's hanging from it, and yeah, it was just that kind of thing where that was the time where they made him not so human. Yeah, that was very much so the superhero, like, where he has the power to not have to make those choices.
What I don't like about that scene is you got 3/4 of a movie that is rooted in realism, and then you got this last scene that just stands out. It's over the top. Like, Mary Jane's whole involvement in the scene, as you mentioned earlier, she falls down. Peter convinced her to make her way down a cable car, which would have torn the hands off her, and then she falls a great deal, and then she grabs herself on the side of the cable car.
About a 30-foot fall.
30-foot fall, and this is a small woman, and like literally her arms would have been ripped out of the sockets.
Yeah, she would have drowned in the ocean without arms.
Yeah.
that's the reality of it.
Like, so do you think that seems a bit out of place compared to the rest of the movie? That was very much kind of grounded, you know, that kind of way. Like.
Yeah, well, that's the suspend your disbelief scene. That's the absolutely one completely over the top scene, and we've seen them in Batman. I reminded, like, what I remember watching that, and I remember thinking of or conversing with somebody afterwards was Michael Keaton's Batman suddenly just randomly fighting a ninja down a lane with 2 swords, and he had apparently those kind of wings on these gloves or solid cast iron or something, and it's just ding 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 ding, and he just fights him off, and you're like, oh, okay. Where did that come from? Yeah, it was grounded in some sort of realism.
It's a tonal shift.
It's a tonal shift. But then again, like they set up a big scene, and it was never going to be a dark enough superhero movie. Like, you had Uncle Ben dying, and that was dark, and that was. But they had to. That's literally integral to his character. But they weren't going to have Mary Jane or a cart full of kids die. Yeah. They just weren't. So they went. So he said, right, we're going to do this, and we're going to go big or go home. Yeah. And it has to work out. It just has to. And that's superhero movies, and I always think, like, that's why I respect Blade, Deadpool. I like anything that's brave enough to kind of differentiate from that. So I always say, like, that's what you get in superhero movies. If you've seen the 2006 Superman movie, natural disasters start taking over city. Millions should have died, but he manages to just swoop in and literally save every single person. Yeah. And that's just kind of like where they throw caution to the wind, and they just show you how amazing Spider-Man actually is. And that was just a scene to showcase his actual power. Yeah. And it was always going to be big. I would have preferred a bit more gritty realism, but then again, it was a Spider-Man movie. You know? Yeah.
So since this movie was produced pre 9/11, but came out afterwards, there was some changes to it and stuff we talked about earlier when we were watching
the bridge scene again.
The bridge scene, like, where Yeah, I know there was some cuts made with involving the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, and
Which, of course,
you had to, because like the way the world was at the time would have been just trounced in the media. But so you get this scene where it's very New York R1 type scene, you know.
Yeah, they start throwing. Like, apparently there was an awful lot of garbage on that particular.
Yeah, well, it's New York, so probably, you know.
And then they start saying, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us."
Yeah.
And it was a kumbaya time in America, just like it is today. Those guys are getting along great.
Oh yeah, of course.
And yeah, it was very much so, like, you know, they should have just had an American flag, like, you know, at full mast in the background.
No, half mast.
Yeah, half mast.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you know.
So I know it was a literally unnecessary kumbaya moment. Where, like, you know, where the Spider-Man gets to be seen as the hero finally by at least some people.
I think that's a matter of perspective though for us, because we're Irish. So for Americans, that scene probably was a home run. You know what I mean? Especially in the wake of what just happened. So I think it was a very, like, the problem with that scene was, like, Spider-Man's relatable to everyone, but that was a very New York
I probably thought it was a very nice moment myself when I was watching it, because the ripple effect of that was felt completely around the globe, and it probably was nice. But kind of looking back at it, and I guess the cynicism that comes with time, it just felt unnecessary. And for me, like, a film is a film. I don't like when a film tries to get very preachy with the outside world. Sometimes political. You know, like, it gets Orwellian, and it's done really well, and it's got a bigger message. Yeah. But I don't like when they just work it into the dialogue of kind of like tertiary. Not even I don't even know what you would call these characters. They're very much so one scene characters. Yeah. Guy with bar. Yeah. Just you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. Yeah. You know? And it's like when Rocky beats the Russian, you know, I can change, you can change, you don't change. And then everyone gets up and starts applauding, and he basically, like, fixed the USSR or something like that.
So after that scene, so New York saves Spider-Man like he saved them on many occasions, which is kind of poetic. So he drops the cable car on a passing by ship or something, and then he saves Mary Jane, and now we're into the climax of the movie. We're into the final sequence where you finally have your protagonist, antagonist, dueling it out in the ruins of this building or something. Man, what you think of that scene? Like, I think that might be, like, I love these personal one-on-one scenes when you have a character that is the pure antithesis of another character. And, like, William Dafoe played that scene brilliantly. And the part you pointed out to me when we watched it was the grenade going off in Spider-Man's face, only doing damage to his suit, was ridiculous.
Yeah. One little cut, because that's what a grenade does when it goes off in your face. I agree. Mess up your mask.
Was it the same grenade that disintegrated all the executives on the balcony? Or
that grenade? I didn't really know what that grenade was, because it literally disintegrated. Like, they became skeletons and then they became nothing. Yeah. So I honestly don't know. It seemed like more like a fragment grenade. Yeah. It was very strange. It was the climax. I like the fact that sometimes, like, superheroes films, they go too big. Yeah. I liked when it just kind of got down to the grit of, like, everyone preferred when Neo in The Matrix fought Agent Smith in the subway versus the second one where he fought hundreds of them when he was at full power. And you were just just the grittiness of just a one-on-one fight.
And then the big reveal is where Peter Parker finally finds out that Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin.
And that has inner conflict.
And that payoff is incredible, I think. It's one of the best moments in the movie.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in this instant, he was the whole thing that coloured his life and personality was the fact that he felt responsibility for his only father figure that he knew for most of his life was Ben Parker. And now when you get to the climax, he's going to be responsible for the death of another father figure. And, like, literally, this must be very traumatic for Peter Parker as a character, because, like, literally, when you go to the funeral sequence, Norman Osborn's funeral, you see that he doesn't want any more attachments. He feels that his life, the way he lives it, is too risky to have personal attachments. And, like, I think the reason Spider-Man Part 1 stands so well as an origins movie, because it covers all these grounds. Like, Aunt May gets attacked, Mary Jane gets attacked. Like, he has to... He doesn't kill Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn kills himself.
They do the exact same thing they did with with Robert. And that's because you need to keep Spider-Man pure, and that's all.
You have to keep him pristine,
But then, and I told you, the best way to get killed in a film, Ra's al Ghul knew that Christian Bale's...
You kill him through inaction and not...
Kill him through inaction. Or even like Spider-Man killed Norman Osborn through self-preservation, and Norman Osborn killed himself through myopic vengeance, trying to kill Peter Parker. So they literally keep the character pure, they keep his identity hidden, and they cross the T's and dot the I's with it. But I thought it was an excellent scene. I thought it was really well handled. And again, for the purity of a character like Spider-Man, I thought they managed to kill off the antagonist and leave him kind of squeaky clean. Even when he wins and he's died, he's not celebratory about it at all.
Yeah, and
it's a very dark thing for him.
Even the fact that Norman Osborn's tried to kill him and kill the ones he's loved, he actually looks after him in the end. He obviously changed him, which must have been awkward, into his pajamas or whatever, and he lays him out on his settee or whatever in his home. And then James Franco, Harry walks in and sees Spider-Man, and he believes that Spider-Man has killed his father and
dressed him and brought him back.
Yeah, which is which must be weird. I actually never even thought about that he must have actually undressed him and redressed him until there now. But they laid the groundwork for a sequel in that one moment.
They very much so did. Yeah.
And do you think the problem with James Franco as Harry? Do you think he's strong enough to be a Green Goblin?
No. And it's the reason he ultimately never, I think, became the... I was sure that he was going to be the main antagonist in the second film when it was going to come out.
Oh, they couldn't though, because it would have been too repetitive.
It would have been, that's what I was thinking in my head. But they set it up so perfectly for it to be that. Because he had this access to the same technologies and stuff like that. But I was glad that they didn't. Again, Harry was quite hapless through the film, and then he loses his dad, so he's hapless and broken.
Yeah.
And... yeah, the character never really did much again for me after that. But it's not a slight at James Franco. I think that's what the character needed to be.
It's kind of like
Spider-Man universe to
the
work.
reversal of Peter Parker. Peter Parker lost. He had this unrequited love with Mary Jane at the start, and then he lost his father figure. And at the end, Harry loses his love in Mary Jane, and then he loses his father figure.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of like the same two things create these opposing ends of the spectrum in terms of the two characters. You know what I mean? And before we start on the next section, do you want to take a quick break?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretend you're Spider-Man. Your mission, to rescue your friend high above. A job for your Spider-Man web shooter. Flip your secret wristband. Take aim. And down slides your man to safety. But wait. There go the bad guys. Reload, take aim, shoot, zap, got 'em, bring 'em in. The Spider-Man web shooter supports the weight of toys only, doll and truck not included. Buy fun stuff.
All right, everybody, welcome back from the break. I'm Vincent Green, and this is Spider Fan. So, first of all, we broke down the movie, went through chronologically. We talked about what we liked and how our initial opinions of the movies and maybe have changed over time. And so now I'm going to sit Noel John into director's chair, like an armchair director, if you will. I'm going to ask you, if you were in control of the movie instead of Sam Raimi, what aspects of the movie you would have changed? And I'm going to just throw a few little kind of topics out to you, just so you're not shooting into the dark, So, first of all, would you have cast Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, given the talent that was available to you in 2002? We can't throw modern day actors into the past and say that we would have liked them, because that's just wishful thinking. So when you look back from 2002, do you think there was anybody else off the top of your head that you think would have suited Peter Parker on the role of Spider-Man better than Tobey Maguire? Or are you happy with him and his portrayal? As you can see, I'm dumbfounded.
That's the thing. It's hard to look back on the lens of who was kind of floating around in 2002. And I always think of something like that. What did he do when he got auditioned that impressed so much? Because sometimes, I always think of Robert Patrick. Yeah. When he got the T-1000 job, he was literally a struggling actor, and he was in a James Cameron epic, and he said it was a look in his eye.
Yeah, he was very reptilian.
Yeah, there was there was just kind of a not that it wasn't human, but not that it was disconnect that he had. James Cameron was, I just love it. I can't get enough. And he didn't have what we were used to at the time was everybody was buff, everybody was good. You had Jean-Claude Van Damme's. That's what that was what action heroes looked like.
Fresh out.
And Robert Patrick was just this kind of completely normal looking dude. So I always think that essentially whoever showed up and did it. And I would always think that if I was in the chair, I wouldn't go in with too many preconceived notions, bar perhaps a young white male, that's it, because that's what was in the comic books, and then just see who can show up. And if Tobey Maguire, they obviously, Sam Raimi got it right, because I really loved him in the role, but would I have picked him? Of course I wouldn't. I'd never seen the guy before. And I don't, obviously, he'd never done a superhero film before.
Yeah.
And he was in his early 20s, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you probably would have given it to somebody who was massive at the time, like Leo DiCaprio or something like that. But I really, really am struggling to go back and think of the young males that were lighting up the cinema at the time. Because even Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and guys like that who were huge actors, they were still, even back then, a bit long in the tooth.
So do you think like it's better to cast an everyman in this kind of role? And
always casting. Sometimes I see films and they're completely animated, so they spend like whatever amount of millions getting in the absolute biggest talent in the world to do the voices, and I always think I don't care.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's great like Seth MacFarlane does like a lot of, he's a great voice actor.
Yeah.
Trey Parker of South Park is a great voice actor. And I when you get them into roles, they make it the role, they're just brilliant.
Yeah.
But then some people are just like good actors, they make them voice actors, and you just think, I don't care. I do not care. Give me the everyman and make a good film.
It's kind of like slightly off topic, but it's like War of the Worlds. Tom Cruise playing the everyman father it's hard to kind of digest because he's a megastar.
Like megastar.
Like a megastar. Exactly. It's like the reason, like, I think Tobey Maguire was probably at that time maybe the best person for the part, because his contemporaries were, as you mentioned, like Leonardo DiCaprio, and Leonardo DiCaprio has been a megastar, so it's hard to look past Leo and see Peter Parker,
Exactly, because you had the kind of guy that, I don't know, when I pictured him as a guy who was just trying to sell, again, the most amazing pictures ever taken by anyone in all time, and like for $200, and then he manages to like stick it out and get $300 for something that would get on the cover of Time magazine, that I could buy that, because Tobey Maguire, I literally just heard his name. I remember there was a film and he's in, and I think he hurt himself in a horse riding accident. And
Seabiscuit.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, it was Seabiscuit. That was before Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, I was before Spider-Man. I was in between films then.
Because Jake Gyllenhaal nearly played Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2.
And he was a bad guy in the most recent.
Yeah, he played Mysterio.
He played Mysterio. But no, I like that. And honestly, I don't like the monopoly that a lot of actors have. So when it broke away from that, yes, Willem Dafoe was a big actor, but he didn't have a monopoly.
Yeah, he would be like an A-lister.
And Kirsten Dunst was, obviously, she blew up because of Interview with a Vampire, as well she should have. But I wouldn't have called her a monopoly either. And it's like you say, today it would probably be like Scarlett Johansson, and it would be like, they'd have to work in Samuel L. Jackson in there somewhere, because it's illegal not to make films with him. And I don't care. Sometimes they're not even the best actors, they're just the names. Yeah. And that's it. It's almost like, it's almost having a jersey that's lovely and is comfortable, and then there's having a jersey with a correct mark on it. And you're like, oh, well, that's worth something.
Yeah,
now.
You want to be able to see the character past the actor.
Yeah, and that's Tom Holland, like the new Spider-Man, fair play to him too, because he just burst onto the scene, and now he burst onto the scene for me as Spider-Man. And if you can go from, you can actually go from superhero into normal. Yeah, it's very hard to go from normal into superhero. Like Hugh Jackman has done a lot of serious roles since Wolverine, and a lot of like Robert Downey Jr. has done like Sherlock Holmes and stuff since Iron Man, and Chris Evans has gone into a lot of new films as well, and that's fine. But you just need to be able to see beyond the actor, and I could see beyond Tobey Maguire, because I personally didn't even really know who he was. I admit that,
So we covered Tobey Maguire. So like, you're happy with Tobey as the Peter Parker / Spider-Man?
He was a little bit old. He was 26,
and
they could have used a kid.
Yeah, but everybody knows what Hollywood back in the 90s, 2000s, they were very, very guilty of using people that were much older than the characters to portray. And so we have Tobey Maguire there, and playing opposite him is such an important character to not just Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but to the whole mythos of the whole, like, Spider-Man mythos is his love interest from as being a kid to now is Mary Jane Watson. And she was portrayed by Kirsten Dunst, as you mentioned, who was a star that had well and truly had come to our attention because of Interview with the Vampire. And
youngest woman, perhaps, to win an Oscar? Was she at the time, at least?
Maybe, I'm not sure. Like, I don't want to throw out falsehoods off the top.
Yeah, no, so, sorry, that's an impression. I'm wondering if I'm wrong. I'm sure I get corrected.
What was that one from the piano? Was there a young girl in that or something?
There was.
Anywho. So
we've covered that other films exist.
Yeah,
that we don't know much about them.
We both understand that we're not big piano fans, so so we're gonna just drop back. So
stop asking us.
Never. We have to get to the crutch of this. But were you happy with her portrayal as Mary Jane? Because we kind of touched on it earlier, but I kind of want to focus on it a bit more.
Absolutely. I always think if you want to be kind of a film buff, a film fan, you have to understand that the constraints that an actor is working within.
Yeah.
So, you could say, I wish Mary Jane Watson, when she got jumped by, 4 or 5 million?
3 guys.
Was it just 3?
Yeah, I think so. But, maybe more, I
think there might have been at least 4. But anyway, she kicked one. She kicked one where it hurts. I think she slapped one or the other way around. Then she got overwhelmed. And Spider-Man showed up and saved the day. And so I could have said, "Oh God, I wish she had knew Krav Maga and had taken out at least 2 of them." And you're like, "No, that wasn't the character."
So you think she was kind of hamstrung by the tropes of her era?
Absolutely, she was. And I don't actually have a slight against the woman, because it probably just was a quite atypical, hapless female. I there was a Supergirl movie before that. It was awful, and then that's what women were. Women were the love interests.
Yeah, it was before the Me Too movement, the #feminism, the real strong female characters. I don't want to say it was before all strong female characters, because we had Ellen Ripley
not by a long stretch,
and Sarah Connor, and fantastic portrayals of Linda Hamilton and Sigourney Weaver respectively. But you're right though, in that era, women in a lot of these movies were portrayed as the damsel in distress, like we mentioned, the live bait that's just pushed out by the antagonist to get the protagonist to come out into the open. And I think you're right, she's a fine actress with great range, and she was kind of literally limited by the role itself.
Exactly. And sometimes you have to just acknowledge that. Sometimes you have to, I just don't, that she read the script and went, right, so I'll be sensitive, I'll be kind, I'll be maybe a bit misguided at times, and I'll be hapless at times, and then she did that because she's an actress, and that was the role.
Because she was cooking up, she had to use the ingredients
exactly.
she was given.
You weren't allowed to veer off and put your own spin on it. I'm sure maybe in a couple of takes she did, but and they're not the ones that
because I think with the range she has, they could have put a lot more meat on the bone to that character.
Oh, easily. Oh my God, fantastic! They didn't Kirsten Dunst is a beautiful woman. They didn't go for the bombshell.
Because she's a natural beauty.
Yeah, exactly. Almost unattainable kind of woman.
Yeah, the girl next door, but with a little bit of roughness to her.
Absolutely.
In the best way possible.
And she was just she was like the every girl, and that was great because you grow up. It was the girl you had the crush on was the every girl.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just the girl you knew that was attractive, but you also just knew her, and she was.
She was right in the reach of attainability, but yet so unattainable at the same time.
Exactly, and she did that really, really well. And I don't know. I think she worked with what she was given, and she gets a tip of the cap for me. Absolutely.
So, you can't have Peter Parker without Mary Jane, and vice versa.
Exactly.
And I think she did the part to the best of her, not the best of her abilities, but to the best of the character's abilities. Given
she was a prop in many ways.
Yeah, which was unfortunate, but it was systematic of its era. But or symptomatic of its era. Sorry, I should have said. But so we got Peter Parker and we got Mary Jane. And you were happy with both of those castings.
Absolutely, I was. Yeah.
And so next up, I'm going to do this as a little bit of a twofer because it's the father-son duality to it. So Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn. We got James Franco as Harry. Would you have cast him as that? Because he had very little credits to his name at the time. As you mentioned, he came on the backs of the Judd Apatow-led Freaks and Geeks. Many cool actors came from that. Seth Rogen, Linda Cardinelli, I never pronounce her name correctly. And
she's dead to me, is that?
Yeah, I thought that was some strong opinion you had of her. She's dead to me. I was like, what did she do to you?
It can be both.
I'll always remember her as Velma from Scooby-Doo. I love those movies.
She was Velma in Scooby-Doo.
The only reason I had a child was so I could rewatch the Scooby-Doo movies. Not feel guilty, and I'll say it to you.
Seems a bit extreme, but
a bit extreme, but I'm a man of extremes, But so we'll do the duality of the father-son dynamic that they had. I want to talk to you about the dynamic they shared on screen, and I want to talk to you about the actors that were cast in the roles of both. So first of all, we'll start with Harry because I think Norman's much more important. So we'll start with the lesser of the two. You happy with James Franco as Harry Osborn?
I was, and again, I think I'd almost apply the same logic to it. The fact of the matter is, his thing is he couldn't know what was going on around him because it would spoil the ultimate storyline.
Very true.
He wasn't supposed to know what his father was really up to, and he wasn't supposed to know that he's best friend. So he was literally that guy in the middle of it that can't pick up any of the clues. Peter been missing in action, his father been missing in action when all these things are going down. He just was. He was in Superman. It's the guy that takes Jimmy
Olsen.
Yeah, he's there like he's kind of like enamored with everything. Everything's kind of amazing to him and overwhelming to him, but he's not really putting it all together, and he's kind of a disappointment. Yeah. That's the thing. He's a good kid, a good heart,
makes bad decisions,
and his father is such a titan of the industry that he's so myopically focused on trying to impress him that he loses sight of almost everything else.
He's a character that's constantly trying to get over other people's shadows.
Yeah, exactly. And then he never really accomplishes it. But I don't think he was supposed to, because it definitely wasn't the Harry Osborn movie.
Yeah, because his defining moment came at the very end of the film.
His defining moment came at the very end of the film as almost a segue into the second film.
Yeah, it was your loose end that needed to be tied up with the sequels that followed.
And the same way a death can kind of inspire a character, like, really solidify them, like I covered earlier. I think it can also make another character more interesting. Because all of a sudden he went from being like the guy trying to impress his dad and all of this kind of stuff to being the guy with a vendetta. And a vendetta is a great thing in comic book films. It just is. So he literally just he went up an entire grade just by the end of the film, and not by anything he did, just by his father dying.
And like when his father died, and he seen Spider-Man leaving him there, and he perceived that Spider-Man was the person who killed his father, and that kind of opened up, that kind of like lifted Harry out of one world and dropped him straight into Spider-Man's world right at the end of the film, preparing him for the sequels. And so you thought James Franco did a good. You wouldn't replace him.
I know I wouldn't replace him at all. Because any shortcomings he had as a character, not as an actor.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
You know what I mean? Like, what do you want me to do? I didn't get to be Bruce Wayne and go training with in the Himalayan mountains or anything like that. That wasn't the character. He kept things ticking along. Yeah, and that's what he was needed
to stick with the food metaphors. He ate the meal that was served with
exactly. Yeah.
So, like, we touched on William Dafoe earlier. I want to touch back on him. I think he was perfect for the part.
I think he was great, yeah.
So I honestly couldn't, like, even thinking about it now, I couldn't see anybody else as the Green Goblin.
Especially retroactively. Looking back on it, going, oh, what would have been a good way to go. Yeah. And the same with Tobey Maguire. That's why I struggled on that, is because he did a great job. So why would I go back? But at the time, I wasn't excited about him.
He inhabited the character.
Exactly. Yeah. But William Dafoe needed a character that could do crazy. Jack Nicholson,
but not outlandishly crazy.
But not outlandish. Yeah, exactly. Crazy, but get something done.
Yeah.
And Jack Nicholson,
crazy with a purpose.
Crazy with a purpose. William Dafoe, he always just in the face. Sometimes he was such an intense, and that's why he was so good in things like Platoon. You could tell he had that 1,000-yard stare that they always talked about.
Do you think because of the rigidness of the costume that we lost some of the, not the appeal, but some of the strengths of William Dafoe as a character?
Absolutely. Well, I again, looking at it in comic book, I don't really know if the mask that the Goblin wore was skin tight and that his expressions moved with the mask, but I would have loved it to be enough of a mask that you couldn't look and go, wait, this is like Norman Osborn. Yeah. But enough that he's just the intent, because he has intense eyes and intense expressions. I would have loved it. I would have loved if they went almost pantomime on it, because the whole thing, he was supposed to be a mockery.
Yeah.
He didn't care. He wasn't trying to be fancy, top military, industrial complex kind of character. He just had the tech and he wanted to use it. But he himself was, again, like a Joker character. So when he kind of came in the all green, we touched on it earlier, like he had the six-pack and stuff like that, I was like, nah. No, I didn't care for that. If you want to get the best out of William Dafoe, then let him be William Dafoe.
I think that's the problem with these kind of costumes, especially from that era, creating a disconnect between the audience and the character. Because when you got these real dramatic scenes, there's no emotion being portrayed in his face whatsoever.
No, of course not.
It's all through his voice, and I think that's why they showed us his eyes a lot and they showed his mouth
closed in on his mouth, because he had this black kind of visor, like a mesh across the mouth, but you could still kind of see it, and he had his eyes really wide gaze. You could tell he was trying to get the best out of it that was available to him, but it was limited. Of course, it was limited. Like, again, my fiance Sheila said he looks like a Power Rangers bad guy. Yeah, I was like, wow, I actually don't have a comeback to that.
Yeah, exactly. He was,
and I wanted to defend him because I was so.
The suit was extremely from its era.
Oh my god, yeah just extremely. And I was expecting again a Megazord or something to show up.
So now that we touched on William Dafoe's portrayal of the Green Goblin, were you happy when you heard the Green Goblin was going to be the villain of the Spider-Man movie when it released?
Yes, I never ever personally thought as the Green Goblin as a main, like after reading all the comics and stuff, I was Venom or Die.
Yeah.
Absolutely Venom or Die. And I thought they all had different aspects. Like again, like Doc Ock was always like a huge bad guy, but I thought the Goblin is a great way to introduce him. Even just think about the power set. He's great for aerial battles.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, he has an advantage. He can fly.
Yeah.
You can swing, but he can fly.
The glider looked kind of cool.
The glider was kind of cool, yeah. So I think the power set, like he was strong, Spider-Man was strong. He was, he was dexterous, and Spider-Man was dexterous, but he wasn't above like blowing up some passerbys just to get the advantage in a fight. I thought the skill set. And again, when I was looking at the big picture, I knew the Spider-Man universe was hopefully going to take off.
Yeah.
I thought Goblin was a great place to start. I thought Venom would have been ambitious. You can't just have Spider, because you can't have the film where Spider-Man gets his powers and gets the Venom.
Venom's always been much later on.
Exactly. Venom is an established Spider-Man bad guy. Even just by design, because a lot of Venom's power set comes from being a part of Peter Parker.
Because of the symbiote's relationship with Peter Parker.
Yeah, so you just couldn't do it. And Carnage, of course, would be a step further than that again. So they were the ones I loved. I like Craven, I like Mysterio, I love Doc Ock. But I think it was a great place to start.
Do you think the reason Green Goblin was picked, because you have this trifecta of Harry, Peter, and Norman, and they're really deep characters that are intertwined throughout their lives, and you got this father-son relationship, and you got this jilted father-son relationship, and it's all combined and all contained within this one character, Norman Osborn, and his relationship with other characters? Or do you think the reason he was picked because technology was slightly limited, even though it was progressing quickly, and the reason they picked him was because he was more attainable or more doable of a character compared to the ones Carnage and stuff like that?
Well, that's it, yeah, he was. Peter Parker having a best friend, and his best friend was always going to be Harry.
Yeah.
Then obviously Harry has a dad, and he needs to be either referenced or in it. And then you're like, what, is he just not doing anything?
Yeah.
He's too big a character to allude to but not use.
You need an appetizer.
Exactly. At the end of the first Christian Bale Batman Begins, they had the Joker card.
Yeah.
He said, that the crime scene, a card was left. And that was just at literally the tail end of the film, a teaser, just a teaser. But Norman would have existed entirely of the film, and the fan base might be thinking, are they leaning towards it? Is there something going on here? It would have been, if they ignored it completely, it would have been kind of confusing. So it was a good place to start because they can easily place him in early Peter Parker's life.
Yeah, and he's a great source of conflict between Harry and Peter the further you go down the road.
Exactly. Because you look at Doc Ock, and Doc Ock was a scientist that Peter looked up to, but it wasn't like a childhood rep. It wasn't a person that he looked up to. It wasn't a person that mentored him. That was never his story. So that was definitely more for an established Spider-Man universe.
And that's why he paid Harry or Norman Osborn the respect he felt he deserved at the end by one not telling Harry who
dying wish.
He respected his dying wish. He didn't allow him to be captured in the Goblin costume, and which. I wonder what he did with that in the glider, which is kind of strange. But
never touched upon.
Yeah, they never touched upon it again, which is kind of strange. But like, he really paid Norman the respect he believed he deserved, even though he committed these atrocities against MJ and in the innocent bystanders on the bridge near the climax. And so, do you think that because of that, because of the way these characters are intertwined, it was the perfect way to start this maybe burgeoning trilogy or whatever?
Yeah, I think, it's exactly what I think. Again, because he could be introduced early into Peter Parker's life, and then you could have his story start almost at the same time, and that felt fairly even-handed.
Yeah.
He had, again, there was all this cutting-edge technology coming through. He was in the military side of it, and I don't really understand what the Spider-Man thing was in the Spider-Man side of it. You know, we were making red and blue spiders that can escape their inhabitants.
Yeah, genetically modified. I just to jump back forwards, but I love in that scene how laissez-faire she is. Oh, so someone must be just examining it or testing it, and that's exactly why that spider got out of that enclosure, because they didn't care about their jobs in that museum, as far as I can tell. You know what I mean? They're just like, there's a super spider on the loose. It's grand.
There's always some prick along the way.
Yeah.
Job,
So. You were happy with the casting for the most part.
I was, but the proof was in the pudding for me. Like, you look back on it and go, yeah, well done.
Yeah.
I don't know, to go back in time, Tobey Maguire would have been on my radar James Franco would have to some degree.
Yeah.
William Dafoe was just establishing great, and I definitely would have cast him.
It looked like Sam Raimi was really focusing on character actors, like Tobey Maguire on the back of, I think maybe Cider House Rules or something like that, at that stage where he played across from Michael Caine, who's a world-class actor, held his ground, he had this range, and he had James Franco, who has a range of as an actor, but not to the same extent as
he's aloof. He's always aloof.
He lacks not believability, but he seems to lack commitment to the role. That the other characters and
intensity. I've seen him in Milk, and I've seen him in. I've seen him in a couple of things. What were the other films? Like, he did a great Disaster. The Disaster Artist, he was actually really good in, but it suited him.
He plays Tommy Wiseau or something, that guy.
Yeah, he plays Tommy Wiseau and stuff like that. But again, he doesn't have that, not that anybody is, but he doesn't have that Al Pacino absolutely owning the room he's in kind of power.
And in fairness to James Franco, Al Pacino's not Al Pacino anymore either.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean. So,
and I wasn't expecting that. But if you compared him to J. Jonah Jameson, my God, like that man.
Yeah, that is, I think, the most perfect casting of any superhero movie. You can say what you want about what happened further down the road, MCU, whatever, characters inhabited in the roles. But I think J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons from films like Whiplash and the TV show Oz and stuff like that.
He was great in Oz, the neo-Nazi.
Yeah, he's an incredibly strong actor with a great wealth of talents. And I think he really stole the role. I kind of touched on it that maybe he should have been given a bit more meat to the part. He did well with what he was given, and so like we covered all the casting, and you were happy with the casting, and you made some really good and interesting arguments for why you were happy with the casting. But I know we touched on it a little bit earlier about the suit, like the Spider-Man suit. I have to say it was one of the best live action interpretations of a superhero suit I've ever seen. Suit. Even after nearly 20 years, 2 decades on, the Spider-Man suit looks incredible still, which is something I was actually kind of surprised by. It's one of the most faithful adaptations of a suit, or the aesthetics of a suit, or whatever that you want to say from a superhero point of view. And it looked incredible then. And I think it's aged really well.
It's aged really well, and it's great that you can just whip it together with things you find around the house.
Yeah, I think that might have been even more unbelievable than the fact that he got bit by a spider.
Yeah, got superpowers.
The fact that they maybe should have explained how he got these things.
Like really detailed.
Yeah, like
super detailed spider suit.
And
with like a mesh over it.
Yeah, and like the eyes and so the material it's made from, the fact that it could take a full-on grenade blast to the face with minimal, like when you're talking about grenade damage, it was minimal damage.
It's like a little bit of blood, and the mask was like 50% destroyed.
Yeah, so God knows what he meant that suit out, but it was definitely worth its money, whatever he spent on it. And so one thing that I nearly forgot about that I want to jump on is the fact that Peter Parker in this iteration as Spider-Man did not use web carriages.
Yeah, and it wasn't until later in the comics that Spider-Man's kind of biology changed and the webs became internal.
Yeah.
I think it was actually against a fight with Iron Man during the Civil War era, and he just lets loose and ties him up enough to get away. But I think it was a bold statement. I don't think I would have done it, to be honest, because I think they established Spider-Man that Peter Parker is a very bright kid.
Yeah.
And also he has friends in the scientific community, so he might have been able to work in that he has access to certain, facilities or something like that, the way they did in the Spider-Mans that we know now followed. But I think he just said, you know what, the hell with it. Let's just go hell for leather and make it just one less thing to worry about, and also one less thing to explain, because the pacing of the film was very good.
But my opinion on that would be, when you watch the cartoons when you're growing up or read the comic books, the fact that he can run out of the webs adds an extra layer of danger or weakness. You know what I mean? If I can shoot these out of my wrist willy-nilly or whatever, I don't have to be strategic in how I use my webs in combat. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things is you mentioned that he's a bright boy, Peter Parker. He's a genius. He's a boy genius.
They never touched on the genius thing.
Yeah, well, they mentioned
clever,
it once,
but never genius.
Just in the opening where Harry kind of says it. He says something like, Peter says, "Your father's not that bad," and Harry goes, "Well, if you're a genius," and they kind of touch on it there. But the fact that they made the webs organic, I think, took away from the aspect of how intelligent Peter Parker is for his age, that he's able to manufacture this web, control and make these carriages. And
it has the tensile strength of steel or something.
Yeah, exactly.
That.
Of course. And I think when you take that aspect away from the character, it does take a bit away, because as I mentioned, it does have an added danger, and he does have to think a bit more how he uses his webs, how he deploys them in battle and stuff like that.
And when he can change them, almost like somebody, like the war scene where somebody's like, cover for me, reload, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It adds to the intensity that this fight cannot be maintained indefinitely.
Yeah.
We're going to run out of ammo. You know, like even just the sitting here doing nothing is dangerous.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, of course he never, like, if you, I didn't really want to jump to the other films, but I feel like I have to mention the runaway train in the second film. And he ends shooting web, pulling buildings apart.
Yeah, it's too much.
And it was excessive.
Yeah.
It was definitely and then for some reason he was able to shoot them as bullets.
Yeah, because people have to remember, like, whatever you say about Peter Parker and Spider-Man, he's the thinking man superhero in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely.
He is the boy genius, like we touched on. And, like, he's constantly strategizing. And if you take away this one real element of danger, it's like, it'd be like, not to the same kind of sense of taking kryptonite away from Superman, but like, I think, to make these superhero movies really compelling, you need as much danger as possible, because they are superhuman, and you take away this element that makes them a little bit more human, I think you take away from the overall narrative, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it was a gadget that kind of added to his power set, because if you looked at the Spider-Man's fall, like, they had the Spidey sense, they had the strength, and they had the agility. Yeah. And it was just an incredible combination for close quarter combat. And then they had the webbing to kind of like basically made them mobile, but the webbing kind of became everything. He could make enough webbing in a second to stop a taxi that's after getting launched 50 feet into the air. So yeah, no, I completely agree. I even thought at the time, despite being quite young, I wouldn't have gone organic, because that's not the way it was in the cartoon, which I loved, or the comics that I read. In fact, he was trying to make like stronger. I remember some comics where he was trying to make stronger or even more sticky, because again, he was the thinking man. So he was like, to fight Doc Ock, I'd have to immobilize him.
Yeah, exactly.
To gain close to him, because I'm not as strong as him. I'm not as strong as he potentially is. Yeah,
because one of Peter Parker's greatest strengths is his mind.
Yeah, like Venom was that's like, I mean, Venom really brought that out in him, because Venom was every aspect of Peter Parker improved. Yeah. So he had to play to his weaknesses, fire and sound.
Yeah, exactly.
And because Venom had biological webbing, Venom was stronger. Spider-Man's sense didn't work on him.
Yeah.
He literally played, and that's why I love him so much. It's not just because I love Venom, and I do, but it's because he brought out the best in Spider-Man.
Yeah, he's the other end of the spectrum that Spider-Man that comes from. Like,
he's like the Hulk Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Exactly. He's stronger and he's faster, and he's definitely a lot more intimidating.
He's like, Spider-Man's the clean athlete, Venom's the one on steroids.
Yeah, he's Armstrong, not the whole thing.
Live strong people.
So I wouldn't have gone biological webbing, but like they did, and they stuck with it. And that's fine. But looking back on it, I would have preferred.
Yeah, it's lazy storytelling.
Yeah, it's lazy storytelling.
It's a device that could have been used to benefit the story, but I think Sam Raimi might have looked at it, and as you said, like he probably thought that it would be too complicated to explain. How he created the web, and even though, and I didn't want to jump ahead of step, but even though when you look at the MCU, they explain it in like a sentence. I made it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember Andrew Garfield goes to like...
No, Tom Holland.
I was thinking about Andrew Garfield, the guy who becomes the Lizard, was explaining to him, he goes, like, how'd you come up with all this? And he literally just taps the side of his own head with a pen. Yeah. Literally just taps his own head. It was all up here, and that's it. It's been explained.
Exactly. Like, there's enough of background source material and all this stuff that we can literally go, I know how he made it. Whether or not you have a technical idea of how he made it, it's not really that important. You just need to know that he made it himself in isolation, and then that's all that you really need to know.
Even the fact that famously the Spider-Man thing, that the webs were always supposed to dissolve in an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Which leaves no trace.
What was Tobey Maguire's deal? Because if that's just normal webbing, he's literally just making the city filthy.
Yeah, and I don't know how he cleaned up his bedroom before he went down. Before Aunt May went up there.
That's a really good point, because Tom Holland, when he stuck Tony Stark's hand to the door, he had a dissolvent.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
I think it's the best way to do it too, because like if you're leaving this web all over the place, you're leaving loads of forensic evidence for cops and shit.
Yeah, absolutely, tons of it. It came literally from you as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's probably definitely going to have your DNA on it. Actually,
never even thought of that. When Tom Holland got to mix with Tony Stark, they were able to bring technology into it, and he was able to, like, the suit was kind of it was a smart suit. And he was able to make like webbing that shot in all directions and pulled everyone in, or whatever, or bullet webbing and stuff. And they were able really to have fun with the genius tech of it.
Yeah, because he is a genius. That's the thing. Like he can be super strong and super agile, and he can sling webs and stuff. But like Peter Parker is a genius. He uses his mind.
Garfield touched upon that more.
I thought like without jumping, but like Garfield wasn't excellent Peter Parker. He really was. He was an excellent Peter Parker and excellent Spider-Man. He looked great in the suit and everything. So we covered the suits and we covered the webbing and stuff like that. So if you came down to it, do you think that the best thing about this movie compared to maybe the sequels is that it only had one villain?
Oh my God, yes. And the second film, brilliant, one villain. And the third film just went off the rails trying to script. That's the thing about pacing. Like, we could say they should have explored this and whatever. It's a criticism. It's not a mean-spirited one.
Yeah.
But you literally have 90 to 100 minutes.
Mm.
And there's a lot you have to get into it. And I'm sure a lot of it ends up in the editing room floor. For all we know, it was filmed. But my God, like the too many chefs spoiling the broth. I've never seen it as exemplified. And it's where Superman, the 2006 film, failed. It didn't give Superman anyone to punch.
Yeah, it just made him fight a continent of kryptonite.
A continent of kryptonite, you know? They needed someone to punch. That's what every superhero film has, someone for them to punch.
Do you think they should have had like Kevin Spacey sexually harass Superman? Maybe
a little bit more fitting with his character, as we found out. Like,
Kevin Rapey, if anyone's listening.
Allegedly.
But less tonight.
Yeah, so we covered pretty much every aspect of this film now, and we're kind of coming up to the end. So I want to ask you before we go. What do you think? Now, I want you to think about it for a second, but don't think about it too long. I want it to be a gut instinct, because this is how you know if someone really feels this. What do you think was the best aspect? If you were to take out one singular aspect of the entire Spider-Man experience, what do you think was the best aspect of this movie in its totality? Just one aspect. I don't need to branch out too much. Gut instinct right now.
Well, okay, I'll just go off gut instinct, and that's the fact that he got all these powers and it didn't fix him.
Yeah.
Because when you're a kid, all you know is it would be so incredibly cool if you could climb up a wall, you know, if you could jump 50 feet from a standstill. But it didn't fix him. In fact, and as cool as it was, and he definitely enjoyed it at times, but it added so many complex layers to his life, put people in his life in danger. It's the fact that it didn't. He's not a dark character like Batman, but they just handled it well, that he still kind of had these struggles. If anything, he had more to fit in a day.
So it's kind of like, even though as Spider-Man he was soaring amongst the top of the skyscrapers, he stayed very grounded as Peter Parker.
Because he had to. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't the billionaire playboy by any stretch of imagination. In fact, he was still a bit awkward and nerdy and stuff like that. Because it doesn't change it in that aspect. It didn't make him suave and cool. So I just thought that groundedness. I thought the fact that he still had bad luck. I thought the fact that things didn't work out for him in a very kind of normal, grounded level. The fact that he didn't get to hook up with MJ at the end because he just couldn't place putting her in danger. And there was actually a downside.
That was a beautiful ending, I thought.
Exactly.
It showed the purity of the character in that clutch moment that this is Ben Parker in his head again. Great power comes great responsibility. You have this great power. You can't be just a normal dude. You have to look out for the ones you love, and sometimes by doing the only way you can look after the ones you love is by pushing them away. Yeah,
because if you fight them, they're going to fight back.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't put anyone else. But me and you, just normal Joe Soaps, we can look and go, God, how cool would that be? But we don't have to invite.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody points a gun at us or something, we just have to get out of that situation alive. That's the only emphasis. But with him, it's like, I can do something.
Yeah.
And the one time he didn't do something, and it cost him so much. So I just thought they did that. They handled that really well. It's the one aspect of it I just don't have any criticism.
Yeah, they kept him very relatable throughout the whole film, I think. Like literally, even though he was catching cable cars and all this, but he was making these very human decisions in a moment where the one I love are these people that are just purely innocent that are being caught up in my life, you know what I mean? So the whole way through it, I think they kept him very relatable, and that's probably is the best aspect of the movie, and the character himself from the source material is one of the most relatable superheroes. So we covered what you thought was the best aspect of the movie. What do you think was the worst aspect of the entire movie?
I think, again, I don't go back on anything I said about characters just playing to the script that they were given. There was just a lot of these characters that were wedged in to kind of like, he needs, well, this is Spider-Man. He has an aunt, he has a dead uncle, he has a love interest, and he has a friend. And they kind of didn't branch out in them. Like, again, it's a slight against the screenplay more than it's a slight against the characters, because they worked with what they were given. But it would have been nice if Harry just wasn't so myopically trying to look for his father's approval.
Yeah.
And if Mary Jane wasn't just a doughy-eyed woman who kind of keeps getting in trouble, who doesn't know where her affections really lie, there was this kind of very one-dimensionalness to them, which kind of worked to elevate Peter Parker.
Yeah.
But didn't do anything to elevate the people around him.
Because he seemed like
universe.
a unique person amongst generic types.
Exactly. The only person who should have been one-dimensional was kind of J. Jonah Jameson, because he's hilarious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He just a guy who lives, breathes, and eventually he's going to have a heart attack and die in the Daily Bugle.
The whiskey on the desk,
with the whiskey on the desk, cigar in the mouth, a tie open and stuff like that. Like, that was the only guy that shouldn't want to mention because of how great that dimension was.
His last words were like, "Get me, Spider-Man."
He's a menace.
Yeah.
But so I thought some of the characters around him could have been fleshed out more.
Yeah.
But I do not. I point out that I do not at all slight the actors, and I do have to respect the fact that it's hard to get it all into 90 minutes.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's easy to talk the talk.
Yeah, I think it probably was hamstrung by its time that way, because a lot of secondary characters were just that. They were secondary. They were just used as plot devices.
We're here to see Spider-Man.
You know what I mean? When you look at further superhero movies down the line, that these secondary characters were actually given a bit of meat on their bones, and the movies benefited greatly from it, because you got this rich history of Harry Osborn, and you got this rich history of Spider-Man, Peter Parker's relationship with Mary Jane. That was only kind of touched on. But I expect it's probably why it was touched on is because it's an origin movie. You know, it is the first chapter in a greater narrative, so you can't really fault them for that. But the script is a bit corny at times, and there's a few action set pieces that are kind of a bit like overdone or undercooked, but it was kind of like it had the only thing it could do was go with the technology it had at the time, and it was state of the art and was cutting edge for its time. But certain aspects of the movie, in that sense, the tropes and the special effects and stuff, haven't really aged as well as we thought it would. But so you think the casting was the best aspect of it, you thought the worst aspect of was the way it kind of limited.
The best aspect was the groundedness of Peter Parker.
Yeah,
just the world, and the worst aspect was they could have fleshed out characters around it. But again, it was called the Amazing Spider-Man. I do get that, and it really did do a good job on Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But I would have liked the characters around him. I put it to you this way: sometimes when the characters around him were on screen without Peter Parker, it was a slog.
Yeah.
When Norman and Harry were having a little bit of a tiff, and then Mary Jane got annoyed.
But once again, that's the limitations of the script, not
it's
the
the limitations
actors,
of the script and not the actors. But I just found okay, when can we get back to Peter Parker trying to balance life and a secret identity and superpowers? They could have fleshed it out. That being said, if somebody dared me to say go and write a better screenplay, I would not be up to the challenge.
Yeah.
So
I'll give it a go if anyone's listening.
You'll give it a go.
But so my least favorite aspect of the entire movie had to be the Green Goblin suit, because I thought it's gaudy. It hasn't aged well. It didn't look well at the time. It was roundly criticised at the time, and it's been roundly criticised ever since. It's silly, it's rigid, it's out of place with the rest of the movie, especially how authentic and how amazing the Spider-Man suit looked. And really, to be honest with you, when you look past that, everything else is pretty good. It's a solid movie, it holds up pretty well over time, 2 decades later. I actually really enjoyed it when I rewatched it.
Same.
So
I think, but it's a big thing, isn't it? If something aesthetic becomes the worst thing about a film, just one, and not even just the aesthetic of the city, the battlefield, the aesthetic of a character.
Yeah.
When that, it has to be pretty off-putting to be the thing that jumps at you.
You can look past it over time.
You can look past it, but a lot of times it would seem like, you're kind of zeroing in on something. But I completely kind of agree. Obviously it wasn't the biggest thing for me, but I completely agree. He showed up, and again, to use my fiance's analogy, it was. She goes, "That's a Power Rangers bad guy, right?"
Yeah.
And then he kind of fell, and he got up and went, "Rah!"
Yeah.
And Spider-Man punches him, and he grabs it, and goes, "Impressive!"
He's a bit outplayed.
Oh yeah, it was really.
It kind of does have the hint of Power Ranger character, like a pantomime villain. Instead of what we've come to expect with a bit more layered and kind of nuance to these villains in our pieces, because the audience asked for that, and we kind of got it, and the films have succeeded because of it. And you look through and you have the likes of Loki and Thanos and stuff like that. These are layered characters. You know what I mean? And you need your villain to be layered for your hero to really come across and to show that these odds are insurmountable. That this is a genius with super strength and superpower. And that's one of the reasons the Green Goblin was so interesting in the source material and the cartoons that followed, is because he was this layered kind of tormented guy. And he was kind of the perfect opposite to Spider-Man in a lot of ways. I know Venom is more of an obvious kind of choice now, but like he's a genius. He uses technology, and like he's kind of like tormented by his past and his own decisions and stuff like that. So, but so do you have anything else to add, or should we wrap it up, or what do you want to do?
I think we can wrap it up. I'm working on a comedy that I wrote and sent it to the BBC. And
awesome.
And I got to the third round before they told me to go fuck myself. So, no big deal.
Awesome.
Got to the last 8%. And it's called Metalworks. And I'm hoping to try and get that out there into the stratosphere again soon. The stratosphere? Yeah, fuck it. Okay. So I said it. I'm owning it.
If people want to find you on social media or anything like that, do you have anywhere they can look you up?
I call Nolly Boats on Instagram.
So Nolly Boats on Instagram if you want to hear about it, and we'll be all looking forward to keeping our ears out for Metalworks. Hopefully we'll be seen on our screens before too long. And until then, I'm Vincent Green. I've been your host of Spider Fan, and this is Noah. Noah, say goodbye.
Bye.
And you didn't know Sheila was listening all along. Sheila, say goodbye. Alright, we're out. That was the first episode of Spider Fan. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Nobody might ever hear this.
Nobody might ever hear this.
Goodbye.
If you're listening to all this, what have you been doing with your life?
So I just want to say before it goes, like, goodbye, true believers. And remember, Stan Lee, we owe a lot to you, and Steve Ditko, we owe even more. Take care of yourselves.
Rest in power.
Rest in power. Good night.